Come on, my friends, I'm Rick, and this is see at table. We're going to try to do a video on our little portable iPad thing, Bob, here that was graciously donated to the channel. Keep in mind that I don't know why the sound doesn't work so hot on this. It doesn't matter how much I turn the volume up on this. It doesn't appear to make a bit of difference for sound, at least as far as I can tell. Yeah. Right. Welcome to Ottumwa, Iowa. I am currently sitting in the parking lot of a place called the Jade Palace. This place has been, we've been doing service here for eight years now, at least. I come down here twice a year. This is Monday, of course, and there's nobody here, which is a good thing for me, right? So, player agency versus game master responsibility. There's a whole hot topic going on, been going on for a few years now. This strong belief in player agency, and the more the players are involved, the better it is for the group, for the players, for the game master, for everybody. Nobody's doubting that whatsoever, and I'm a strong believer in this. I'm a strong believer that the players are there to play. The game master should not be ramming things down their throat, right? And we're familiar with the inevitable ogre, or the quantum ogre, or whatever you want to take it. So this is where the conductor of the railroad has determined that something's going to take place at point B, and corridor A and corridor C always lead to point B. So no matter what direction the game master or the players choose to go, the GM is still spinning this thing around, so they end up where the GM wants them at. Now this might come as a shock, especially to you newer players. That's how it used to be played by a lot of people. That's not saying it's the greatest way to play. Nobody is saying that that's the greatest way to play. And yet, it's traditionally the way it's been played for decades. And as I pointed out in a different video, I've been playing and running games for 50 years. That's 5-0, that's 5 decades. I'm 59. I started around 7 or 8 years old. Bought my first book at 9. I'm 59. That's 50 years. Right? Just pointing that out to a few people that just sometimes, you know, they assume that if you don't role play every day, if you don't game master literally every day, that somehow that doesn't qualify a person's experience. Right? So, well, I got a list of stuff, right? So we're all familiar with, or most of you are familiar with the total player agency. This is where, or maybe you're not, this is where you basically remove the game master from the equation almost entirely. And there are some advocates for this. And a big cornerstone foundation of the fourth dimension of theater of the mind, of total play, is benched in that. The game master should be as minimal as possible, as evasive as possible. Okay, that's what you're shooting for. The elimination, in essence, of that role from the table. Okay, as opposed to the opposite. The opposite, once again, like I said, I had the privilege of actually playing the first edition white edition, the original stuff, because my best friend's brother owned it. That's how I got started. And then his brother bought the very first issue of the basic box set. I bought the same one shortly after that point. So roughly 78-ish, and I was 9, and I'm 59. Hello. 50 years. Right? So we're on the same page with that. 50 years. So back then, the dungeon master ran the show. The Dungeon Master created, if we didn't have a pre-packaged, a pre-bought world, and at that time, we were working with Greyhawk that came with the basic set. Prior to that, we were making things up ourselves. And we were young and inexperienced, and frankly, nobody did this stuff. Very, 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 very few people in my tiny little town that I grew up in even know what this stuff was. So when the satanic panic broke out, it was pretty devastating to a lot of small rural communities and people like myself. Anyway, so back in the day, the literal railroad, you were not only the conductor, you were the engineer, you were the brakeman, the track foreman, the chef. That's all kind of rolled hand in hand with being in this, total control position of the Dungeon Master. It was from there. And if you look at the Bronstein connection, you can see the very early baby steps of player agency, of where players not only want to be more involved, they really need to be as involved as possible in as many of the processes and steps of the game creation and campaign as possible. So ideally, when we talk about session 0, you should actually have session 0.1 and session 0.2 as well. And this is where we sit down as a group and decide on things. What kind of, what's the sandbox going to look like? Are there major factions? Are there something we need to worry about? What's the pantheon? Are we in a setting, a genre where we need to worry about the gods and goddesses? Do we need to not worry about that? So all that is something you cannot get done in session 0. If you think you can, good for you, but you're shortchanging yourself, in my opinion, from 50 years of freaking experience. Yeah, I'm a little cheesy about it sometimes. I get you. Okay. So get this reference that pops up every now and about the quantum ogre. Basically, all paths lead to the ogre. So no matter what the players do, they're always going to end up facing the thing that the dungeon master, the game master, has decided is going to be the goal, whether it's for the session, the event, the entire campaign. Doesn't make a difference. So, if we want the players to have agency, how much agency? Total, complete, 100% total. So everything that goes on at the table in the campaign is by committee. So everybody in the group agrees that this is how we're going to do this, or this is the setting we're going to pick, this is the genre we're going to play in, this is the tone we're going to set, and this is the world we're going to create, because we're all going to participate in creating that world in some form. Right? All laudable stuff. I'm just asking. As opposed to the total agency of completely removing the game master total from the equation, right? What are then a GM's responsibilities? I'm asking you. This isn't about me telling you my thoughts on how this ought to work, because I'll be damned if I'm doing that. No, you get enough of that on YouTube. YouTube's full of it. Lots of really good videos and some crappy videos like mine, plenty of them, with people who've got an idea of what they think things should be. Well, I'm not going to give you that. What I'm asking you, though, is to consider how much agency is agency, and too much agency is it too much or not enough? In a different, unrelated video, I was watching earlier, actually on my way down here from Des Moines. It's almost a 2-hour drive in this old beater, because it doesn't get over 65 mile an hour. It checks at 65. And then I know what it's called too. There's a limit in here to how fast I can go. Anyway, so I was listening to a couple videos on the way down here, and they talk about player agency and getting away from or downplaying dungeon masters in our roles, and then what are the responsibilities of the GM at that point? Okay, so in this video, he has a young fellow at his table, actually it's one of his kids, and he's in his early teens, about a little older than the age I was when I first started, right? I would invite you, middle to younger folks, to put on my shoes for a moment. I lived in a tiny town. Didn't have a driver's license until 82, when I was old enough to get one. So I didn't have parents who were inclined to take me wherever I wanted to go. So my parents never took me to the only game store in Des Moines, Iowa, which is the center of our state as far as our state's concerned, more or less. And I had to sneak a ride with a friend I barely knew, and I use the term loosely because he was there for the summer. Then his family were renting a house they were staying in, then they moved. But his father took us on a road trip to Ivor's Dungeon, my first time ever stepping into an actual game store, and it was just, I can't really express just how different, how I was amazed and how much I wanted to play even more, right? So we snuck home in elementary school to borrow my best friend's older brother's stuff until we could buy our own, and then we played every day, or almost every day. We tried our level best to play every day. And this went on until high school, and then we have jobs and girlfriends and activities and things that started where we were playing once a week, maybe a couple times a month. And that has been, the litany for a good the first 3 decades of my life. And then things really slowed down and things changed yet again. And here we are, more or less you've heard me cry and rant and rave about the situation since. So, young fellow wants to be a GM. I'm all for that. But I asked him a question. Ask yourself the same question. How many people at your table own all the material? If you've been in this hobby as long as I have, there's a reason I have several bookcases full of stuff. It's because I've been buying and buying and collecting and collecting and buying for 50 years. 5 decades of shit. It's just what it is. I get my stuff that way. And I keep it, and I hung on to most of it. I still have some stuff that I gave away to my oldest son back in the day, and man, I wish I hadn't. But we won't go down. But he's talking about doing the very, very similar thing. And I don't know that this is his son or not. I don't care one way or another. My question was, or my comment was, great. Encourage him to be a dungeon master. He wants to be the game master. Let him be the game master. But, because you know me, I got to have a but in here somewhere. I got to have a caveat here. But, is he wanting to borrow your stuff to do this? Now, if they're willing to sit at the table and look at your stuff and think, I want to do this, and ask questions and stuff, that's great. But from personal experience, a lot of people who want to be a dungeon master, a game master, whatever you wish to call it, change their mind in a hurry when they actually have to go out and spend several $100s to buy the stuff, depending on the system, of course. If you're buying into D&D today, what does it cost you to get 4 or 5 of the core books? A couple $100. And can you really run a game effectively without at least, the player's handbook, the monster manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide? No, there's argument you can get away with that, but not needing half of this. But could a new person who's never run a campaign, never run a game at all, has maybe only played for 6 months, suddenly wants to be the GM, could they run a good, create and inspire and mediate a good campaign, even a mediocre campaign, without falling into, Jeff from the Gang and Gang's process of being a bad GM? Inexperienced doesn't mean they're bad, it just means they're inexperienced. Unimaginative doesn't mean they're bad, they just lack imagination to be good, or at least not boring. And lazy, well, Lazy kind of goes with the territory, right? I mean, you can get, lazy can be cured. If you get a sudden burst of ambition or things change in your life and you decide, okay, yeah, I got to get me out of Pepsi. It's actually coming up on lunchtime, noon, I guess. It is what it is. Still. Okay. So, total player agency means you don't need a dungeon master, a game master. By all rights, then everybody at that table should own a copy of all the core books. Am I wrong? Hello? How much, this gets tossed around a lot. If you want player agency players, what are your responsibilities at the table then? What responsibilities do you share with everybody at the table? I think, in my opinion, you should have at least a working understanding of the basics of how the system works. Whether how combat, magic, space flight, whatever the system, whatever the genre, you should have at least a passing understanding of the basics. You should have at least a passing understanding of what's overboard and what's not in relation to things like skill sets and dice rolls and checks and balances and all this stuff that little junior Ricky, my friend Richie and Richard, when I was, because that's my preferred full, I'm big on my full name. I only call myself Rick really for this, for the videos, for YouTube. Anyway, my best friend and I were horrible dungeon masters. Horrible. And we were horrible players because we were 9 and 8 years old and we were just learning. And guess what, Daddy and Grandpa, grognards everywhere? We didn't have mentors to work from. We didn't have an older group of our siblings playing on a regular basis and we're sneaking in and listening in on what they were doing or convincing them to let us sit at their table. We didn't get any of that. And a lot of you have had that experience because the hobby is such a wide open sandbox itself compared to the way it was 50 years ago. That's 50 years, 5 decades. Are we on that same damn page? Yeah, that was a beef that was an issue I had with Mr. Schoner too. Because his idea was if you weren't at it every damn day, well, you couldn't, you were exaggerating. It's not exaggeration, it's just the facts. That's how people quantify experience and things, fool. It's like saying that, that airplane pilot, well, he's an experienced pilot. Right, but I know a whole lot of other people with some really lousy flying skills that barely know how to fly. Would you put them in the cockpit of that jumbo jet that's carrying you and your family across the ocean? Just asking there. Right. So, for total player agency, my friends, are you advocating for total game master absolution? Are you advocating to do away with the game master altogether? And we're not talking about the game master and the issues with game master having too much agency, having the ability for conducting the railroad, having the literal all paths lead to the quantum ogre. Okay, we're not talking that. We know that to be a reasonably decent GM, you need to play and to run, to learn, to be open-minded a little bit, to keep your ears open and listen to your players. Now, I've got plenty of experience at tables with players that had almost or no experience role-playing. They were actually put off by the whole idea because of the negativity that tends to run around with it, and a lot of people that stick their nose up, or are being disingenuous at best when it comes to something they don't know, so they poo-poo it. I find it really ironic and amusing how many of these certain types of individuals who absolutely would never role play at a role-playing table. I would never sit down and play one of them. But you have absolutely no problem playing fantasy football. Oh boy, they hate it when I think, and oh, so you're big into role playing, huh? Yeah. You're role playing a coach or a producer or whatever it is that runs the freaking team in football, and you want your football team to be better than the other guy's football team. No. Wake up, Chuck. You're playing a freaking tabletop game just like everybody else. Pen and paper, whether you do it on a computer or not, doesn't matter. It's the same principle. And some people get really into it, really excited, and some don't. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about the 4 dimensions of role play, well, I stick at number 2 for a lot of reasons. Number 2, the second stage of role play, is the most common used in most tables. And that's for 50 years of experience. 50 years of experience. With playing with the very diverse groups of people, dude. I have played games at tables with people that would scare the pants off of you. I ain't kidding you. And I've played at tables with literal murderers and rapists and worse, because they want to play too. They want to have fun. They want to try something different. I've played at tables with young kids that have no freaking clue what the hell we're doing. And all I can do is trying to make the afternoon a pleasant day for them, because I really don't have the patience for that level. And the people who do, and they do videos on it, oh man, God bless you. Seriously, God bless you. I would literally start tearing my hair. I run from scenarios like that. I honestly do. And those of you go out on a regular basis to your local game store to invite people in to be ambassadors of the hobby, man, hey, I would take my hat off if I'd take my hat off if I had a hat on at the moment. Total player agency. I think at the end of the day, majority of you, if you even think about any of this, other than aside from the occasional crazy conversation on YouTube, at the end of the day, you fall somewhere in between the level 2 and level 3 of roleplay. And so the longer you play, the more you get into something, the more you want to invest in it. It's like player agency, and I think that player agency is a term that's getting tossed around way too much these days, and not necessarily it's being used as a catch-all for a lot of things it really shouldn't be. So, does player agency really have anything to do with game agency, of the story agency? What do you mean? What do I mean? We want you to be as a game master from 5 decades. 5 decades. As a game master, I've played literally 80%, 85% of my freaking life. I've been a game master, a dungeon master, you name the damn thing. I've been that, whatever the game called it, that was me, because nobody else wanted to do it. They didn't want to buy the books. They didn't want to put the time in to read the books. They didn't want to try to understand things. They didn't have the creativity to really go out on a limb on stuff, or they didn't want to. Or they just didn't want to spend the time. Is that agency? Is that the player agency you really want? See, there's a difference. There's a difference here. So, player's agency, in my perspective, is, as a game master, it's not my job to tell anybody at the table what their characters are going to do or how they're going to do it. Rule number 1. That is player agency. Allowing the players to play. Allow them to play their character, to role play the character. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's their role. Don't ever try to supersede that. That's the key corner, the key point of player agency, in my opinion. Second part of player agency is kind of a little more dodgy in my mind, because this is where the players also have part of that social contract that they've agreed to take up a certain level of responsibility as the players. If you want the players to be involved in the campaign, the players have to be willing to be involved in the campaign. Come on, how many games have you played? How many sessions have you sat at with that one person who, for whatever reason, simply cannot engage like everybody else can? Or their idea of how they want to play is vastly different from everybody else's. Once again, you can choose not to sit down at that table and play. That's your prerogative. But what if it's your only table? If I didn't sit down and play with my friend Richie and the occasion whomever came in and left and came in and left, I would have not got to play very often, if ever. At least until I was old enough to have a driver's license. It wasn't like I could go around town and recruit new players. We tried. It doesn't always work out well. And we're talking a different era then. We didn't have social media. We didn't have YouTube and internet and Twitter and excrement and whatever else these other companies and other things, none of that existed. None of it. It wasn't until I got to go to high school that I started meeting other people who was into hobby. And I started to understand that this hobby was much bigger than I thought even then. But for the lion's share of my youth growing up, it was actually a closed, it was a growing hobby, but it was tiny compared to the way we see today. You people really have no clue just how far that we have come and how much the hobby as a whole has advanced in those 50 years. It's been a privilege to sit there and watch it grow and to develop and to turn into things I never thought it would turn into. Right? Just saying. When it comes to the game masters, I think the game master takes on a certain level of responsibility by accepting the role of game master, which by definition grants the game master a little bit of agency too. The game master should have the ability to alter and adapt the environment regardless whether or not player agency has any bearing on it whatsoever or not. The players may have helped design and create the world they're playing in, but are they the ones then to decide the encounters too and how the encounters are going to go and whether we should, well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. In the ways, yes, they decide whether or not they're going to engage in that encounter, whether they're going to decide to fight the kobolds or not, or try to avoid them or outsmart them, or they're going to decide to whether they want to go into that dungeon in the first damn place, no matter how much work and effort you put into creating it. And what happens when they don't? That comes from experience. You will have that happen, and eventually you have to learn to adapt with it, or you end up throwing tantrums and not having anybody at your table for very long anyway. Then you would qualify as being a bad GM in a lot of people's eyes. Yet, we want the players to be engaged. I want them players to be as much involved as possible. But yet I have to call a line. I have to call, as a game master, I give you all the agency I think you're entitled to. And I think you're entitled to a lot of agency. But there's limits. Your agency stops at that table once it starts playing. In that you don't get to just up and decide 3 sessions of the game, I don't like this player anymore, this character anymore. I'm just going to, this character's just going to walk off and I'm going to introduce a brand new character. I've had players who that's their whole thing. That was all they wanted to do, was just to create the next character. There's a lot of people that find that the best part of role-playing in the first place, is just creating the stuff. And then they get bored with actually using the stuff and want to move on to creating more stuff. That can be a problem. That can be very disruptive to a campaign, to a game. And if you have a player who does that on a regular basis, you need to, A, convince them to, have a discussion with them about why they're doing that and just how much of a pain in the ass it is. 2, put them in your chair. Let them run the game for, the next couple months and see how they like it if the shoe's on the other foot. And some people will still like it and run with it, and then your game evolves into basically that. That's what you want your table, right? Then there's the world creation. By all means, I really believe the more involved in the creation of the big sandbox the players can be involved in, the more into it they're going to be. This thing extends to things like their backstory and factions and people they know or don't know, and a whole lot of other things that can be nicely utilized by any good GM. Even moderately good GMs can take advantage of all the information and material that the players are giving them. It's like I advocate that while you're at the table, you listen to what the characters are saying and doing. Because sometimes through their actions and or lack of actions and things that they drop and say as characters at the table in game, you can utilize that stuff to further the game dynamics, right? If you choose to agency the players to the point where there's no point in having a game master, and this is where I start getting into one of those sessions where people, well, you don't like total theater of the mind, you're against a fourth dimensional play. I'm tired of y'all saying shit like that. You ain't saying it me directly, but I'm hearing it indirectly. That ain't how that works. I've told you 100%, I'm a huge fan. The deeper you can get into role-playing, the better you are, the better your campaign will likely be, the better the experience will be. But there are certain advocates out there that truly would like to just get away from, the game material. Here it is. It's funny, but I am literally 100 plus miles from home in a town I come down to, I don't know, every few months. They got 4 or 5 places I do down here. And I don't know about you, but what do I have in my truck? I have a PDF, of course, but it's a printed book version of a PDF. This would be Operational Turning Points, the Red Corsair for Battletech. Now, why do I carry it around on why do I have, you went to my house, I have the second novel of King of Thrones, and I'm partway through it. I read a page or two a night, so it's likely to take a year to get through it. But I have read Game of Thrones, I have read Game of Thrones 5 or 6 times from all the books I own, several times. And I've watched, of course, the HBO series or whatever, so, Meanwhile, in my bathroom, I currently have a Fan Pro version of the Periphery. I have another Battle Technology. I also have Thay, first edition Dungeons & Dragons Thay sourcebook in a magazine rack next to the toilet. Why? Think about it, because I read a lot. I read every chance I get. So if I'm sitting someplace where I'm waiting for a customer to show up, I can be reading on material. If I'm sitting at the bathroom doing my constitutional, I can read instead of just sit there and stare at the wall and wonder. Meanwhile, just about everywhere I have any lingering presence at, I have game-related stuff. I mean, I freaking come in this truck and I carry a bloody bag with me full of crap. I've got the core book to my own would-be game sitting in here, because whenever I get a chance, I pound away on it and try to get a couple more, paragraphs, a couple more lines, something more done. But the point I'm getting at, though, right? Does that make it, me a bad GM because I'm kind of obsessed with the hobby? Should we eliminate the game master position altogether? Once again, there are advocates out there to do just that. Must be noon. Sounds like a siren's going off. Right? Just saying. What do you think? We talk about all this stuff about player agency and downplaying the game master's role, or changing it to the point where they almost no point to him at all. Let me tell you one little more thing, and I'll just get out of here. We'll call this video good. Another hour and 45-minute long drive back to town. Plus, I gotta go dump the truck, and I've been on the clock since 5:30 this morning. Right, so I'm gonna go get this done. I'm going home today. Anyway, if the game was nothing but all for and mostly about the player, I probably would never have been a dungeon master in the first place. I mean, I learned I wanted to be a dungeon master after watching my friend do it a few times, because he wanted to be one because his older brother did it for him a couple times. So he was kind of to mimic his brother as best he could, plus the very, very limited explanations how to do things in the very early books. If you don't believe me, go find a PDF of the white book and go find out the very earliest edition of D&D is very thin, very tiny, and it has almost no introductory stuff. What I mean is they don't have anything to teach you how to do this stuff. They expect you to learn either by example, by participating at somebody else's table who figured it out, or figuring it out, which left it open for us to interpret things quite wildly and widely and not necessarily always accurately. Part of that was youth. Part of that was inexperience. Well, I don't know what kind of siren that is, but that sure keeps going on and on. I can't imagine. Finally winding down. I was going to say, that's crazy. I grew up like I said, I grew up in a small town. Every day at noon, they used to sound the whistle. Every day at noon except Sunday. And Sunday mornings, it was the churches ringing their bells. And that was like that all through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think they stopped doing it in the 90s. They only do the once a month, first Saturday of the month to test the storm sirens and stuff, tornado sirens. So, if you eliminate game master agency, you minimize game master participation, you dilute game master interpretation, what do you have left? What do you have left? And how many people are going to learn to play? Really going to learn to play? So we go back a little bit to something I keep hitting back on. I really think that people sit there and say, well, I could take a new player and teach them how I want to play. Sure. You know, I learned the hard way after I graduated from university and went to college, got my degree, and then I found out, guess what? Everybody that, I went to school with and stuff ended up going to get jobs for something unrelated to what I went to school with. Well, if I knew that, I would have tried to get something that was more effective for what my experiences were, my real world experiences were, and not what I wanted to do at my age, because I had numerous would-be employers tell me, well, if you were younger, we could mold you, or if you were, right out of high school or right out of the service, we could, but you're 52, and you don't have any background in any of this stuff. Why did you take it as a class? Why is this your diploma based on something you had no real experience with? Right? Just ask yourself that. There's such a thing as too much agency, too much player agency, just like there's such a thing as too much game master railroading. And if you don't think you need to railroad once in a while, you have never been a game master. And if you're telling people, oh, I don't ever do that, I've never had to do that, no offense, you're lying. You're lying or misinterpreting or forgetting your own basics. And if you never have done this, I question whether you're really a good GM in the first place. My personal opinion, of course. It plays out. So a young junior wants to be a game master. Fine. Go buy the books. Make the investment in the hard stuff first. Invest in the books first. Oh no, I want to learn how to play using somebody else's stuff. Well, that's great for one session, maybe. And only under the tutelage of the person that owns the books. But it's BS to, I want to be this, well, let me borrow your books. No, because like I said, I've had it happen. And I've had to replace books because people didn't bring it back or forgot about it. Or it was like, oh, I don't want to play no more. Well, give me my damn shit back. Hello? You only have to have that happen once. In my case, twice before you just don't do it no more. And I hate being that guy. I hate being the guy that says no. I really don't want to be the guy that says no, Or the gal that says no. Well, I can't be a gal that says no. But you get what I'm saying. I don't want to be the person who has to say no to somebody who really, truly wants to learn how to play and could be a very damn good game master given the chance. If they're willing to sit at my table with my books and I'm there and I can answer some questions for them, I'm more than willing to do that up to a point, because that can become abusive too. And I'd say double. This goes double for family. No offense, fella, dad, your kid wants to do that, make him buy the damn book. Or you go buy him the book for him as a gift. But you don't give him your stuff. If they're willing to actually be the dungeon master, let them buy the material to start with. Get the core books. If they don't own those basic core books, then by rights, they really can't be a good dungeon master because they don't have all the tools, the bare bones mechanic tools. No? Try working under the hood of any kind of vehicle without a tool bag with tools. You don't get very far with your fingers. Because I've been there and I've tried it. It don't work. You can be a young fella in the middle of nowhere, bumfuck Iowa in my case, and have a 15-year-old car that breaks down all the time, and that you do everything you can to keep it running. You learn to carry a lot of stuff in your trunk. There's always been a running gag about women and their purses. Well, guess what? You want to know a guy? Look in the trunk of his car. Yeah. You'll tell how hard off he is. A poor guy carries a lot more shit in his trunk than a rich guy does. Just saying. Think about that for a minute. Just give it some thought, my friends. Till next time, from the great city of Ottumwa, Iowa, southeastern bumfuck Iowa. And excuse my foul language. Some days it's just hard for me to not speak my mind completely. Right? Anyhow, that's not something in my mustache, by the way. My wife and I was going on about that. That's actually freaking gray hair in my mustache, and I know I'm getting old. My mustache is starting to turn gray. My hair started turning gray a few years, 3 or 4 years, 5 years ago. Yeah. Anyway, till next time.